you had a wonderful weekend. It is absolutely fall in New Jersey. We are full on leaves turning. The long story, since I was a little kid, there are certain fruits that come due this time of year that I absolutely love. And at the top of my list is chestnuts. I am a chestnut maniac. I do love my chestnuts. And I cook them all different ways. Sometimes I boil them. Generally, I roast them. Love them on an open fire. Believe it or not, you do that, they taste even better. The trick with chestnuts is first you want to get either Italian or Portuguese imported. American chestnuts, I'm sorry, this is not me being overly Italian, but American chestnuts just don't have the flavor of the European chestnuts. I prefer the Italian ones over the Portuguese because they're a little bit bigger. I know that's a shock to you. But if you happen to live in the greater New Jersey area, Ciabras is a great Portuguese supermarket, and they always have very fresh chestnuts. Other than that, there's Johnny's Produce in New Jersey, because fresh Italian chestnuts imported from Campania, which is near Naples, which are second best to Sicily. Anyway, you want to soak them. First, you want to cut the shell. You make an X on the shell. Then you got to take a paper towel, or I'm sorry, a cloth, a dish towel. Put the chestnut in a dish towel, because if you don't, you'll cut your hand. They're a little slick. Get a bread knife, a serrated knife, and make an X. And you soak them in water for, call it 10 minutes. You can add a little salt. Sometimes that helps. You want to let them get a little wet. Then you put them in the oven. The trick is to take your time. I do mine 35 to 45 minutes at 350. They come out beautiful. You crack them open. They're heavenly. So anyway, so this weekend I had lots of chestnuts. I had this other thing called persimmons, which in Italian is cacchini. It's that orange fruit, and there's two types. There's the vanilla round one that kind of tastes vanilla, and there's one that's shaped like a cone. And the weird thing about persimmons, you almost want them to rotten before you eat them. You want them really, really ripe. So I've enjoyed those. And then I had figarini, which are cactus fruit. And that sounds crazy, but they're very purplish this time of year. They're very ripe, and you got to get those imported as well. So my weekend was full of cleaning up the garden, taking out all the plants. It's time to take them out. Eating some of my favorite fruits and vegetables, watching the Georgia Bulldogs just roll. Unfortunately, I set my second favorite team, Penn State. Oh, what a game, but they blew it at the end. But ultimately, a beautiful fall weekend. And tomorrow in New Jersey, it will be, for the first time, in the high 20s, low 30s. It's going to get cold. And then for those of you out in Chicago, you got your first blast of snow. I think I'm in Dallas, Texas today. And it was clearly no more than 35, 40 when I got off the plane this morning. So nice and chilly. Welcome to fall. It's supposed to be that this time of year. I watched the deer go crazy. This time the deer are running around like the maniacs, because it's getting ready for winter. It's the mating season. And, it's just one of those fun times of the year that we just kind of settle in for the next phase of what's happening. For those who remember the clocks, they fell back. You got an extra hour of sleep. And unfortunately, it's a lot darker now. We go through that dark phase. These next 6 weeks are hard on me. They're my least favorite 6 weeks of the year. This and March. Never like March because we're all cold. But as we get through this from now until December 22nd, this real dark days, and they get darker until then. It's not good. You got to fight my way through it. Anyway, enough about my weekend. I'll be going down to see the girls in Georgia for the Georgia-Texas game. I'll send them your regards, because a lot of people ask about that. But other than that, hopefully you had a wonderful weekend. The government shutdown. Now, interesting. Let's start with there, because I want to throw some stats at you. But the shutdown is what it is. I mean, these things are generally more political in nature. I've talked a lot about how the shutdowns in themselves generally do not cause recessions. We've never seen a recession caused by one. But certainly, when you think about where we are in the cycle of it, what does it mean? I mean, is there a scenario where, in fact, we would have, call it a problem, a recession from it, and that would we be in a scenario where, in fact, all of a sudden, because of the shutdown, would be so? For example, me flying here today was really quite difficult. I'm on a trip where I'm visiting a few different places, and unfortunately, I'm dealing with canceled flights already. Now, I know the president came out this morning, because it seems like there was the potential for the shutdown to end here. It seems like we are nearly done. The Senate, we had the gang of 8 go over from the left to the right, because they're tired of seeing folks not get their SNAP benefits, or dealing with the military or the FAA and so on, not being paid, some being paid, some not being paid. Quite a mess. with the expectation that the president will come to the table with a negotiation around Obamacare or the National Health Care Plan, and that the 1.5 trillion in subsidies would be renegotiated as something different. Hopefully lower cost, hopefully a better product, but certainly that they're willing to take the leap of faith that the president will in good faith come and negotiate. Let's see. I think the president's got a lot of writing on it. If the president doesn't hold true to his promise, I think it would bode very bad for him. As you know, in the elections that just happened, New Jersey and Virginia, now I don't think it's a big deal that blue states go blue, by the way. But the margin that they won by clearly suggests that not only did they go blue, they went blue in a big way. Some of the regional elections in Georgia, and then obviously the change in the congressional districting in California, all blue went very blue. So I think there's an issue out there. As much as we talk on this podcast about how things really aren't that bad out there, for the folks who make less than $75,000 a year, it's tough. We know food prices are still very high. Going out to a restaurant, extremely expensive. Buying a plane ticket, buying a piece of steak, very difficult, piece of beef. All these things are still quite high. We talked a bit about a break in gasoline. I just saw in Fort Worth, Texas, where I am today, $2.60 a gallon for gasoline. So that's obviously a help. Wages continue to beat inflation. Across the board, wages are still higher than inflation. Now we're seeing wages on those who make less than $75,000 a year come down faster than those who make more than 75, but the rate is still above inflation. So why I want to start today is what does a shutdown mean for now? Well, when you look at what it means, it's estimated that a government shutdown trims about 0.1 to 0.2% of GDP, so not a lot of money. However, it could be a drag on the total growth of the United States if it lasted for a full quarter of 0.5 to 1% of GDP. So that's quite a bit. Or put in a different way, you're looking at the shutdown costs around $13 billion to $15 billion a week in revenue for the federal government. So you have to look at that and say to yourself, what does this ultimately mean? Well, assuming it's going to get resolved here, and the markets are reflecting that today, it's not a big deal. But it does come down to that we've gotten to a point of inflection, whether it's airline travel, whether it's folks who are just out of work, whether it's the president went and was on TV on Sunday at the Eagles Detroit game, and he was inducting a bunch of young folks into the military, I want to say 10, 15 kids, and resounding boos. And of course, in that area of the country, there's a lot of federal workers who were unemployed or let go because of DOGE. So popularity is a meaningful thing to this president. It's any president. But I think you have a scenario where his popularity waning a bit, an election cycle that told him, hey, you better get things going here for all levels, getting interest rates lower, get the economy going even hotter. Otherwise, losing the midterm election means we'll go back to the stalemate of the Democrats won't let a single thing go through. The Republicans will get very frustrated, and we'll be back to an economy that just won't grow because we can't get any real legislation passed or any issue for that matter. My point is the shutdown is nearing its end. It wasn't not a recessionary issue yet. Doesn't seem like it's going to be, but certainly it's good that it's going to be resolved. Whether it's airline travel, think about Thanksgiving spending. Thanksgiving spending is a big amount of money. If we're not able to spend at the prolific rate we normally do, then obviously it creates an issue. Meaning, will people travel? Will they be buying food for their dinners if they have less people at the table, and so on? So it's a good thing that it's coming to an end for the most important for the folks who are not unemployed right now and waiting for money, and also for the overall health of the U.S. economy. It seems like we'll be resolved and back fully not shut down anymore at the latest Friday, potentially Wednesday. So that's all good news. We're not quite there yet. Earnings season continues to be strong. Earnings are still up over 13% on a year-on-year basis. That's exactly what the market needs. When you think about where stock prices are, divided by how much companies earn, that ratio of stocks versus earnings is not good. You're looking at 23 times earnings. So a fancy way of saying if the average is 16 over the last 100 years, to be at a 23, forget what the number means if you don't understand it. I totally get it. But between the two, you're trading for your price of companies is expensive. So in other words, if your average over the last 100 years is the price of a stock divided by how much they make. So if your price is $50 and you make $5 a year, that's your earnings ratio. Obviously 50 divided by 20, 50 divided by 5 times 10 is 50. So your price to earnings ratio would be 10. In this case, the average over the last 100 years on the broad S&P 500 is 16. Right now, it's 23 on the S&P 500. So the P is much higher than the E for earnings, price divided by earnings. So what's happening is you need the earnings to get bigger. and the earnings have done quite well. 82% of companies on a year-over-year basis have beat their earnings estimate. So far for the quarter, earnings growth looks like it's going to be around maybe as much as 10% as well. And what you're seeing is profit margins on the S&P 500 still be quite healthy. In fact, we looked at the analysis of autos, and for all the amount of money that's been sent out in tariffs as of right now, 90% is being absorbed by the car companies. We're seeing very little passed on to consumers. Why? The price of cars year over year is not up a lot, fractionally. You look at most items that are tariff related or have a tariff cost to them, the consumer is bearing somewhere between 30% to 40%, in some cases as low as 5 to 10%. So far, the manufacturer, the distributor, and the consumer are absorbing all three when it comes to cost of tariffs. So what it means is that the U.S. GDP is still relatively healthy. The economy is still growing relatively well. It's just that the stock market is expensive, and if we continue to get great earnings growth, then we have a chance for markets to kind of not sell off and hang in there. You know, this past week was a tough one on the market. Why? Because, as I mentioned already, valuations are pretty high. When you think of things like all what's happening around AI, for example, there's a lot of hyperscalers that are spending incredible amounts of money. Meta, for example, is going to spend something like $458 billion on AI investments. That's up 32% year over year. These numbers are quite incredible. That's Meta and Google combined. And you see this kind of money being spent by these gigantic companies on artificial intelligence. We are all in on it. But yet when you look at things like the byproduct of AI, yeah, I had questions for it. I do on a regular basis. I go into ChatGPT and I take a look and try and get a feel for what's happening out there. Just to ask silly questions about whether it's health or the economy or build things. And I think it's fascinating how quickly it works. But I'll give you an example. In New Jersey, this election went pretty badly for the Republican Party. A buddy of mine who was running for sheriff, unfortunately didn't win. My buddy Mike Monacchio did not win. He was on the Republican ticket. And you look at why the Republicans lost, part of it's electrical costs. You know, in New Jersey, electrical costs are up 19% year over year. Nationwide, electrical costs are up anywhere from 15 to 19%, depending on where you live. Why? Well, one, the movement to green. It's much more expensive to produce green power as of now. Shutting down coal plants and turning on gas power or using solar is still not. It's getting less costly to install them, but the transition from one to the other is still very expensive. And then at the demand, we have a greater demand for energy than we've maybe ever had before, and part of it is AI because of data centers. Data centers need a lot of power. So when you look at that issue around power, it's creating this inflationary issue where elections go the way they go. And I know the new governor of New Jersey, as an example, wants to put a freeze on any higher electrical prices, day one, calling it a state emergency. Well, good luck with that, because New Jersey has to buy its power. Why? Because New Jersey does not have nuclear power plants anymore. It has very few gas plants. We actually really buy our power from other states that make it. A lot of states do that. So that puts you in a negative position when it comes to be able to manage your own cost of power. So an example of how inflation is so hard to figure out. It's not always just the Federal Reserve hikes interest rates, and because they've hiked interest rates, we're going to lower inflation. It's not just that simple. There's other components to it that can determine whether or not inflation is going up or down, whether it's the labor market, whether it's something like where does power come from, what's the price of gasoline, what's happening in rents. And where I'm going with all this is when you think about what's happening in the U.S. economy, earnings are good enough to hold the stock market kind of where it's at right now. But to push it higher, we've got to resolve some things around inflation. Will the Federal Reserve cut interest rates again? And as of now, right now, it doesn't look like it. And I'm going to give you a little forewarning here. If the Federal Reserve doesn't come to the rescue of the market in the month of December, I think we have a problem. I think we could see a nasty, 10 to 15% sell-off, 5 to 10% sell-off in the month of December if the Fed doesn't cut rates. And the reason why is because the market is fully expecting a rate cut in December. I mean, 66% chance. But that's, I look more or less about the chances and more about the rhetoric, the talk around it has been clearly that we're going to get a Fed rate cut. So at a time when the shutdown could have hurt the market, at a time when we're the latest round of data, but we're not getting a lot of data right now. We did get ADP data that came out and said, as of right now, ADP suggests we added 42,000 jobs in the month of October. That was a bit above expectation, but you could have lost as much as 153,000 jobs from the government payroll side. So your net number for October is probably negative. We'll find that out in a few weeks here as the government turns back on. So unemployment getting a bit worse, earnings a bit high. Prices a bit high. So the government issue with the government suggesting that, that could be expensive and take some time to turn back on here with the shutdown. We're in this period of instability. And even though we're holding on with earnings, I think the economy is holding on good enough, but it's not where it's going to boost much higher. So at a time of the year when normally October, November, especially November and December, great months for the market, haven't been that great. And even when we saw ISM manufacturing come out recently, again, in contraction, the stuff we make, we did see one piece of ISM. Remember, I talk a lot about ISM. Anything above 50 is expansion, anything below 50 is contraction. It came in again at 48.7. But we did see the prices paid number for goods in ISM fall to the lowest number in 9 months. That's a really good sign. So the reason why that's so important is because deflation sometimes takes time to work its way through the system. And if in fact we're in a scenario where you have some sort of deflation coming in because of these higher costs of interest rates for this long, and the effort by multiple corporations to bring costs down, whether it's through AI, imported goods, negotiating tariffs, producing more, and so on, you might have this scenario where, in fact, we start to see some deflation in the system and the Fed can eventually cut rates more than we would expect. But what's interesting right now is that you're starting to see some deflationary trends in the data, which is good. Rents, for example, have been down a bit recently. Now, ISM services, which is much more important to the overall economy, was at 52.4 in October, which is a good thing. So our service sector is in expansion. But remember, hotter services means it's slower for inflation to come down. Now, put it all together, I think we are ebbing slowly down. It's not like ISM's at 55 or 58, really hot. 52.4 is a good number. It's in expansion. New orders and business activity expanded a bit. Employment, according to ISM services, expanded a bit. So it's all pretty healthy. I guess what I'm saying, we're kind of like in this boring environment. Earnings good enough, GDP good enough, shutdown maybe getting resolved, growth just good enough. We did see the number of temporary people being added for the holiday season potentially might be a lot lower than expected, which wouldn't be great. We would want to know that number. We did get some information on retail sales, and this is important. How the consumer spends this time of year is critical. Can you imagine we're going to spend upwards of $1 trillion this holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas alone? And why that's so terribly important, as the consumer spends, so goes the U.S. economy. I mean, it is very clear about how that all works out. And just to give you an idea, the NRF, National Retail Federation, said when you look at retail spending for the month of October, month over month, retail sales improved by 0.5%. And if you look at that on a year-over-year basis, we're up 5% year over year. That's a wonderful number to get to up basically 5% year over year at a time when the consumer has, in theory, been called dead numerous times. Well, obviously, that puts you in kind of a weird spot. The consumer, how dead is the consumer? If the consumer is out there spending right now, then that's not terrible, especially at a time when we need them to spend. Halloween looks like it came in somewhere between $13 and $15 billion spent. That's an incredible amount of money. And go one further, when you think about where we're going to spend on Thanksgiving, well, it's not just airlines and so on. It's going to be all the other things around Thanksgiving. You're talking between back to school, Halloween, and year-end sales, maybe as much as $1.1 trillion. That would be the most ever. And if the consumers show up to do that like they are so far, then I think we might be okay. Here's a problem. The one problem I laid up besides earnings, that I am a little spooked about what's happening in the labor market. Maybe, just maybe, we're starting to see a bit of a contraction in labor. And there are some signs that say the layoffs are increasing a bit. Now, remember, we haven't had government data. So I'm a little worried about the government data not being clean enough and effective enough. So I did mention ADP earlier. I did mention the fact that we had a lot of federal employees laid off. And maybe we didn't add as many temporary jobs as we thought. But I do think it's helpful to keep a real close eye on it. Because if we start to see unemployment, specifically layoffs, increase, then we might have a much bigger problem. For the week, the market struggled. Why? Because where I started this today, valuations are expensive. The S&P was down 1.61. Now, in fairness, on the day, just to be clear with you here, let me see, hang on. Because of the potential resolution and the shutdown, The Nasdaq's up 2.3%. The S&P 500 up 1.59. So basically wiping out all the losses for last week. However, for the week and on the year, the S&P's up before this 1563, and as of today, it's going to be up about 17%. The Russell 1000 growth is still the winner, up 1794, and after today, probably up about 19%. And even small caps today having a pretty wonderful day. Small caps up about 1.5% today as well. At least they were. That's a much more volatile asset class. My point is the good news around the shutdown ending has spurred the more markets higher. The bond market is still doing quite well, up nearly 7% on the year. Kind of stalled here as we expect things to get a little bit better and haven't been exceptionally better. I'd put it all together and say, we're kind of in this wait and see moment, to be honest with you. Not that exciting, just trying to see how it all shakes out. And now it looks like the shutdown will end. It's a good time of year for stocks. The first steps to the shutdown really are very important. And I think ultimately you get to a scenario where it's a bit of a wait and see moment. We're wrapping up earnings season here. Things get relatively quiet through Thanksgiving. I wouldn't expect any significant change unless something goofy happens with the shutdown or something unexpected happens. In other words, kind of a boring week, nothing too terribly exciting, decent news. What might be interesting as the government turns back on, assuming it's going to turn back on. Well, then what happens if we all of a sudden get a whole plethora of data that comes out? All this data that we haven't been getting suddenly comes out. And in that scenario, once it all starts to come out, maybe we'll get some different types of news that could spook the market. For now, I think it's a really good idea to take some profits. You made a lot of money in large cap growth. There are other areas of the marketplace like small caps and international that are interesting. The bond market's a great place to be right now. Why are we skipping the bond market? I think it's a really nice, interesting place to be. And at a time when I think we can see the opportunity to go into other asset classes like commodities if we get into a normalized tariff environment. Like, for example, emerging markets at a time when emerging markets might be critical to global growth at some point again. I think there's going to be a lot of other opportunity to change the way the portfolio looks and feels over the next couple of years. And the reason why that's so important is because we've been stuck in this mode of just by large cap growth and nothing else matters. And don't get me wrong, some of these companies are wonderful companies, but there is going to be this opportunity to do other things. And we're seeing this sort of small business liftoff where there are optimism around. So we'll get some small business data around optimism in the next couple of days here. But I do think we're starting to see new business startups, as well as the potential for regional banks to loan money again. I think there's something to be said for what might happen if we can get on the other side of tariffs, if we can get on the other side of the government shutdown, and if we get to a scenario where we don't really real breakage in the labor market, we may just see many other asset classes do much better than we would have expected. And I think that's pretty exciting. All right. So in other words, don't fret. Nothing too crazy out there. Relatively normal market. Nice bounce back today. Diversify your portfolio. Take some profits. Look to add fixed income. Think about entering small caps if you haven't already. And don't be afraid to go overseas. I think it is time interesting to go overseas and get a sort of a, call it maybe a dividend play that'll help you keep things in check, if you will, or be paid to wait around. All righty. It is time for my shout out of the week. Well, that's an easy one today. This is an easy layup. Mine is to all the veterans of the United States. Tomorrow being Veterans Day, how can you not salute the people who protect us, who have gotten us to this point, who protect capitalism, who protect the United States, who have sacrificed their lives for this or been maimed for life or just served the United States in any way. So all the veterans out there, my hat is off to you. I am not a veteran. I thought as a kid, I don't know why. It just wasn't something I ever thought about. It just never crossed my mind. Who knows what my life would be like? I think it's an honorable thing to do, and sometimes I regret it when I meet these folks who give up so much of their lives for us. I mean, I still think the United States is the greatest country in the world by a lot. There's no one even comes close. I just don't see it. I'm sure we're not perfect, but there's a lot. We do it a lot better than most other places. The ability to generate wealth, the ability to have your own ideas, have your own property, the protection of women, the protection of minorities, immigration, patent rights, bankruptcy laws, all these things that make it such a powerful country. Perfect, no, but certainly a lot better than everybody else. And for that, I salute the veterans today, because without them, we would have no United States. Without a doubt, for sure. Well, everybody, I hope you had a wonderful week. I hope you do something fun this coming weekend. I hope you're enjoying the fall season. because it is that time of year to enjoy it. Unless you're in Chicago, where it turned into winter already. Ski season right around the corner. So I'm trying to get myself in better shape because of it. Anyway, have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you for listening to me today. I'll have lots of guests on between now and the end of the year, by the way. I'm going to have lots of folks join me to help wrap up in the last 6 weeks. Well, you imagine I'm saying this? Last 6, 7 weeks of the year. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Go Bulldogs. Big weekend. Sorry, I'm in Texas, but I'm moving for the Bulldogs just for today. But anyway, have a great week, everybody. Talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.